Hello everybody, I'm Nick, and in this video I'm going to take a look at 4 of the most used LINQ methods in the whole of .NET. Those are single, first, SingleOrDefault, and FirstOrDefault, and explain how they work on a surface level, but also how they work behind the scenes, and take a deeper look into their performance, because you could be using the one that feels right for your use case and works fine. However, you could be crippling your application's performance because of how they work behind the scenes. So even if it feels right, it might be the wrong one to use. And remember, you're using first and single with maybe big collections and also predicates, and those can have a significant impact in your application. So in this video, we're going to sort all that out. If you like that of content and you want to see more, make sure you subscribe, ring the same notification bell, and for more training, check out nickchapsas.com. Now, before I move on, a quick reminder that I'm running my in-person workshop, Introduction to Effective Testing in C# and .NET, in a few conferences around the world. If you're watching this too far in the future, I'm going to have updated links in the description down below. But for now, I'm running it in NDC Oslo, NDC Sydney, .NET Days in Romania, NDC Minnesota, and NDC London. And I'm probably going to have more. So if you want to join and learn with me, check the links in the description, speak with your manager, speak with your company, and see if you can make the trip. I'm really looking forward to seeing you there. All right, so what do I have here? I have a simple console application with a list of strings, and those are a few names. Now, I'm just going to start by explaining what each one of those methods does, just to make sure that we're all on the same page. So if I want to get the first user in this enumerable or collection, then I would simply say users.first, and this returns the first, and I can say console.writeLine first, and if I run that, then as you'd expect, I'm getting Nick Chapsas back. Now, if I want the first that starts with chap, for example, then I can pass down a predicate here and say this starts with chap, and if I do that, then I get chap Nixas over here. And then if the thing I want does not exist, so does, then as you can see over here, I'm getting an exception. Sequence contains no matching element. Now, if I use the or default variant, I say FirstOrDefault, and I run this, then I'm getting nothing in the console because the thing is null. It's not failing, it's just falling back on the default type for this value. And I can actually say comma here and specify my own default value. So NA if the thing is default. You can override the default value of the type if you want to, and I'm getting NA, not applicable here. Now, the single method works a bit differently. If I say single here, this will actually throw an exception and say sequence contains more than one element, because single wants you to have only one thing. So if this was like that and I said single, then it returns single, no problem. If there is nothing in there and I run it, then it will still throw because sequence contains no elements. So single is very particular about the one thing. Now, I can also have predicates here, and I can also say single where starts with chap. So if I do that, I will get that single. But if I had a second thing that started with chap and I run it, then it will say, hey, throw exception, sequence contains more than one matching element. So single has to do with the guarantee that you only have one of a specific thing. And the or default variant for single says that if you find exactly one thing, then return it. If you find nothing, then just return that. And we can likewise override the default value. And if I run this, we're getting an A. And this is how these methods work. Now, why is this very important? Well, it's for a couple of reasons, because your gut when you're querying a big set of data might be that since you only need one value that matches your predicate, you might go with the FirstOrDefault. However, is it super important that you only contain exactly one of this value? For example, let's say you're storing emails and you have a policy that says that you can only use one email per customer or per user. When you're querying that set of data, do you want to guarantee when you're doing that query that there is only a single one over there? Or is that something that maybe a constraint in your system or your database even should have sorted out before you? Because your gut says, yes, I want to make sure there's only one there. However, when you use the single alternatives, in order for the method to guarantee that there is only one, it has to go through the whole collection unless it finds a duplicate before the end of the collection. So let's say I have something like that, Nick Chapsas over here, and I use the SingleOrDefault method on this list. So let's say that, let's just implement the example. it looks something like that. Now this thing will actually throw because Nick Chapsas exists twice in the list. However, it will not stop computing until it reaches the last item, which happens to be me again, because it needs to have that guarantee that exactly one of what you want is here, in this case 1 or nothing. Now because LINQ and those methods can also be used with NT framework with a different provider behind the scenes, the queries you generate also reflect that. For example, when you're using Single, you need to guarantee on the database level that this value is unique across your database, meaning that if you use that, your query won't stop computing until you get your match plus an extra one, or your query just finished querying your whole database to make sure that there is no more than one. While first one will actually add the top one or limit one in your query to make sure that you're only querying the first one. Let's see how all that makes more sense in a benchmark. So we're going to add a couple of classes here. The first thing I want to add is a customer class. I think this should look something like this. And then I want to add a customer service class, not services, service class. Here we go. So this is what this customer service class looks like. We have an in-memory list of all the customers, and then get by ID with SingleOrDefault, get by ID FirstOrDefault, get by email SingleOrDefault, and then get by email FirstOrDefault. So we're checking all the main differences. One is with an integer, the other one is with a string, just to have a more spherical view on the problem. Now, I want to populate this with a bunch of realistic looking data so I can actually query and get better results. And for that, I'm going to add a library called Bogus in the mix. I have talked about Bogus in a dedicated video showing you how you can make realistic looking data for your tests or your experiments like this. So I'm going to use that, and I can use a faker on the customer object and specify rules. So rule for the ID, it is an index faker, meaning an auto increment integer for this. In this case, the full name is a full name of a person, and this person class actually has a bunch of different other things like first name, last name, website, phone, company, and tons of other things I might want to use. Same for email and same for date of birth. So if I actually use that just to show you what this does, customer service equals new customer service, and I add a console.writeLine so this doesn't exit, then if I debug this, then let me show you what happens. I can go into here and generate a bunch of customers, 10,000 customers in this case, and all of these customers have realistic looking data. So ID is 0 and it auto increments, and then Jake Braun, which is a fake name with a fake date of birth, then Gabriel Abbott, and so on and so forth. These realistic looking data for my customers. Now, just to guarantee that on every execution of my application, this faker will generate the exact same 10,000 users in the exact same order, I'm going to specify a randomizer seed and say new random and just give it some value over here. And if I do that, watch what happens. I'm going to stick a breakpoint here and I'm going to just let this run, go here, generate them. And as you can see, the first one here is Amy Zuloff, I guess. Then the second one is Jody Beer. The third is Blanche, whatever. So if I stop that and I run it again, then as you can see here, let's step over this and expand it. The same Amy is first, the same Jody is second, and the same whatever that is third. So with all that said, we can use that as the service we're going to run our benchmarks against. Now, because we're running benchmarks, I'm going to go ahead and add benchmark.net into the mix, and I'm going to create my benchmark class. Now, what I want to do with this benchmark class is actually get a list of those 10,000 and try to get with both FirstOrDefault and SingleOrDefault the first customer, the 5,000th customer, and the 9999 customer. So get an early exit point, a midpoint, and a late exit point for my data set. So to do that, I'm going to create my new benchmarks class. Here we go. And this doesn't need to, but let's add the memory diagnoser anyway for our benefit. And we're going to have the customer service as a read-only thing that's only going to be initialized once per execution of the tests. And then these are the two benchmarks I want to start with. FirstOrDefault by ID and SingleOrDefault by ID. Now I'm going to create a property here called int ID, and I'm going to specify a params. And this means that the test will be executed per parameter that is being used in the benchmarks. So both of them for 0, both of them for 5,000, both of them for 9999. And with all that said, I can go here, I can just comment this out or delete it, benchmark runner.run, and I can say benchmarks, and let's execute those benchmarks now and see how they perform. So results are back, and let's see what we have here. So as you can see, getting the first item index 0 with the FirstOrDefault 24 nanoseconds, getting it with the single 82 microseconds. That is a few orders of magnitude slower. Then getting the midpoint is 40 microseconds, which is basically half the single on any other execution. And then getting the last one using the first method is 76, meaning that on average, to traverse the whole thing, you take around 80 microseconds, and the single method will consistently get the exact same result. However, first, because it exits early, reflects that in its performance, and if it finds it first, goes out. If it finds it in the middle, which is bang on in the middle time-wise, then it goes out, and if it waits till the end, then it performs like single. Now, what does that mean for you? Well, it means that sometimes semantically and logically, single is the thing that you should be using. However, just because of how it works, first ends up being a significantly more performant thing on average. Single, when you only have one match, will consistently be slow. It will have to go through a whole collection because it always has to do 1+1 matches to fulfill its behavior, or no matches in the case of the default. However, first, even though you don't know where in the collection your item might be, it will be as fast as it needs to be to find it from that collection. And in terms of a database, because you're gonna get that limit or that top on your query, it will actually be faster there as well if you're using NT framework. So even though it doesn't make sense logically to go with first, because first implies that you might have a duplicate like a second or a third later, it's still better to use if you can have the safeguard of the thing being unique in a different place, maybe when you're inserting the object, or maybe your database has a constraint. So don't sneeze on that. That is a very visible performance difference, and you're gonna see that in your applications. I was someone who was using single for everything because single just makes sense for the thing I'm trying to do. However, when I moved to first and I managed my safeguards and my constraints in a different level, then my performance did get a boost just because of the collections I was dealing with and the predicates I was dealing with. Remember, this is just a simple match on an ID. If you had something more complicated here, this will get exponentially slower because you have to run that calculation on every single thing in your collection. So what should you use? Well, always test what you can afford using. However, first and FirstOrDefault seem to do the trick better if you really care about performance and you can manage the uniqueness somewhere outside of the query itself. Well, that's all I have for you for this video. Thank you very much for watching. Special thanks to my Patreons to make these videos possible. If you want to support me as well, you're going to find the link in the description down below. Leave a like if you like this video, subscribe, don't forget to like this, ring the bell as well, and I'll see you in the next video. Keep coding.